It's 7 August 2016, Sunday afternoon, and behind me there's a green round composting bin that's got worms in it, and right next to it there's two wooden crates that I use to make thermo composting. There's four things you need to do to have a thermo composting pile. You need carbon, you need nitrogen, in other words you need brown leaves and you need green leaves, and then you need oxygen and you need moisture, and you also need a pile that's about minimum 3 feet long, 3 feet wide, and about 4 feet high. The reason being is you need a pile large enough to retain the heat from the activity in the center of the pile, from the bacteria, as they change the carbon and they oxidize it into carbon dioxide, change it into CO2, and as they do that, heat's released, and as the heat's released, you need a large enough pile to retain that heat, because you lose heat in one of three ways: through convection, through conduction, and through radiation. Conduction is basically through physical materials. Heat passes from atom to atom, from the center towards the outside of the pile, and eventually just dissipates into the air. And then you got convection, which deals with fluid and air, and so as the pile heats up, the air rises, fluid arises, and goes out of the top. So it's often necessary to put a tarp over your thermo composting pile in order to retain the heat and the moisture. And last but not least, all living things radiate. They radiate light, and though we can't see it because it's in the form of infrared, if you had an infrared camera, you would see an aura around all living things that are heating up in the form of different colors: red, orange, blue, and you often see it in, for instance, in radar of clouds. If you go to a weather station and you check the radar out, you'll see different colors of the clouds, which will indicate the temperatures of them. So that's the bare minimum of what we need to do some thermocomposting. And basically, thermocomposting is, the ideal conditions are when you can create a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 25:1. That is going to create ideal conditions for decaying, for decomposing and rotting. And that's basically what we're going to do. As I move to the front part of my yard here, over my left or my left shoulder here, where I'm pointing with my thumb, there's a satellite dish, and I'm doing both thermocomposting and worm composting in that. That's about a 13-foot round satellite dish that holds about 200 pounds or 200,000 worms. And then right to the center, we're going to come over here real quick. And behind me, you can see I have a tripod set up, and I'm going to put this camera in the tripod so I can show you these ingredients. There's wood chips here. There's barley. It's looks like this, and it's got some mycelium growing in it. You can see the white stuff. Right next to that, we've got coffee grounds. If this stuff gets wet, it'll compress and moisture won't be able to pass through it. But when it's dry, you know, it's crumbly and it's good. These two are a source of nitrogen, and this is a source of carbon. And then I've got the wood chips mixed, and down here near the bottom, they're composting after 30 days. And then over here, this is what I consider dead soil. It's got no life in it. You can just see it just falls out of my hand like dust. There's no structure to it. But after I compost those three ingredients, I create a soil. It's this deep, dark, organic material, and it's called humus. And humus is compost that's just further composted. So I'm going to put this camera back in the tripod, and we're going to talk a little more about thermocomposting. What we're doing is continuing our talk on thermocomposting. behind me I have my ingredients that I mix together to create this super soil, this deep, dark, humus, organic matter. And the way I do it is I've chosen to use wood chips from a local tree trimming company that throws these away. These are made out of fir and pine, which is typically a harder wood chip to decompose. For instance, there are some type of trees that you don't want to use, like a cedar tree that has antibacterial qualities. Most of the time you want to use deciduous trees, trees that have their leaves fall, because they decompose the fastest. However, when you get the right ingredients and things still will decompose and decay at a readily quick rate, as I'll demonstrate. I use barley grains. They come from the breweries. They're waste product. After they're done boiling these in water, they have a product called wort. It's basically unfermented beer, and then they no longer need the grains and they throw them away into the landfill. And so we save them and we use them to compost and create our super soil. The problem with these grains is they retain so much water that they compact really densely and they inhibit air in the compost pile. That's why we combine them with wood chips, 50 to 50 or 1 to 1. So the carbon to nitrogen ratio is like 200 to 1 for wood chips, and it's like 10 to 1 for the spent grain, and it's like 25 to 1 for the coffee grounds. So when we mix them together, we try to get that magic combination of 25 to 1 where it allows acceleration of decomposing, of decaying, and of rotting. And when we do, it looks like this after just 30 days. It's already turning black, it's already decomposing, it's already rotting in just 30 days. And after 6 months, it further decomposes until we have this really rich, dark, beautiful soil. It's life infused, it's got great soil structure, it retains moisture, and it's a perfect product for growing our vegetables. What happens in life is we use these man-made fertilizers that are sodium and ammonia based, and when you have soil, salt in the soil, it dries things out. It's hostile to the bacteria in the soil that's necessary for life in the soil. And it's almost, if you can imagine being on a boat in the ocean, you're dying of thirst and you're surrounded by water, but you can't drink the salt water because it just makes your condition worse. And so it is with the bacteria and the fungus and the other life forms that are in the soil. The salt blocks them from becoming hydrated, and so they perish. And when they do, you get something like this. You get dirt. You go from soil to dirt. It doesn't hold any moisture. There's no structure to it. It's just dust in the wind. Dust in the wind. That's all it is. You know, when I go inside, I wash the dirt off my hands. I never wash the soil off my hands. Because when you hold the soil, it's like a sacred experience. That you're holding life. And this soil, it's filled with life. It supports the plants. And then the plant life supports our life. And that's why it's so important to start with the soil. So we have this carbon to nitrogen ratio. All living tissue has a carbon to nitrogen ratio, and so we're basically combining these different carbon and nitrogen sources to create a 25 to 1 ratio, which allows the rapid acceleration of decomposing, of decaying and rotting. And so we can move from these 3 fresh products to this soil product in approximately about 6 months. Now, what makes it difficult to understand in most people's minds between carbon and nitrogen is we say carbon's brown and we say nitrogen's green. However, we look at this, it's coffee grounds, and it's not green, is it? It's brown. But this is a nitrogen source. So, and we look at the grains. These are a nitrogen source, but they're not green, they're brown. So it confuses people. And now we look at grass clippings. Well, they're kind of green. Yes, they're a nitrogen source too. Certainly the apple, that's a nitrogen source, it's green. And now if we look at some leaves here, they're green. But the same leaf is carbon. It's a maple leaf. This is what the maple leaves look like when they're dead. And this is what they look like when they're alive. So maybe a better way to understand the concept of carbon to nitrogen is think of is that the brown is dry. There's little or no moisture in it, and the green has moisture in it. That's maybe an easier way to label the nitrogen and carbon. So the green has moisture and the brown is dry. Maybe that'll help you understand how to choose carbon or nitrogen. So that's pretty much it for the concept here. Next thing what we're going to do is talk about worm composting, and I've got 4 different worm composting bins in my property here, and I have probably about 200 to 250 pounds of worms, which is about 250,000 worms. That's in containers, and I probably got double that on my property. So this is Kevin signing off and wishing you well to the next video.